So this is the official start of Roundtable 4 for the Business Coalition for Healthier, Longer Lives. As I know there'll be people sort of joining the line over the next few minutes, so I will do a bit of a preamble, but I'll let Terry go first, Terry O'Dwyer, who's the host of the series and also of the final wrap-up session. So I'm going to hand over to Terry first, and then I'll come on in a few moments. So Terry, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much. So welcome everybody again. My name is Terry. I'm the founder and CEO of Longevity Leaders. I think most of you would have come into contact with me at some point or another, but in case you haven't, Longevity Leaders is an organization that brings together the leading minds focused on extending health span, and that includes looking at the multiple challenges and opportunities that longevity brings, we run several events, forums, conferences, and as such, in fact, our conference is today. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I would encourage you to head on over to longevityleaders.com and see if you can get access to the conference. I've been supporting the APPG for longevity since its inception, really. I'm really pleased to be a part of it. I think the conversations that are going on here are incredibly vital and important. My role here is really as a supporting partner to Tina, so I'm here to help on the back end sort of things and try to see if I can ensure a smooth transition to the breakout rooms when that happens. I'll be in the background, so if you do have any sort of questions or technical problems, or you're in the wrong breakout room or anything like that, you can private message me and I'll make sure you get reassigned and try to keep things as smooth as possible. So that's really my role here. Again, I'm really pleased to be able to be a part and support this initiative. With that, I'd like to hand back to Tina and let you guys get on with it.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you so much for all your invaluable support for helping us run these important roundtables. And of course, there's the final wrap-up summary on Friday, the 22nd at 3 o'clock, which is on the final day of the Longevity Leaders Conference, which is now taking place. So thanks Terry and his team, who've been really a fantastic source of support throughout. So Jeff Filkin, Lord Filkin, who is essentially together, Lord Filkin and I have worked together, obviously with a huge network of experts and partners and sponsors and organizations. He's not here today, unfortunately. He will be joining, obviously, on Friday. But just to say a few words, he normally says, in the sort of this section here, is just a little word about what we're trying to do with these roundtables. So Lord Filkin and I, together with the APPG and the advisory boards and the networks and partners, we launched the Health of the Nation strategy in February, right before actually COVID sort of has come to bite us all, and had a very successful launch and had outlined a series of 9 core recommendations. So we had a whole action plan formulated to address those core recommendations, and then of course COVID sort of struck, and actually very quickly we realized that actually really the recommendations will in many ways be even more apposite and relevant as we emerge from this crisis, because essentially our focus for the Health of the Nation was very much around how do we deliver 5 extra years of healthy life expectancy while minimizing health inequalities. And as we're seeing unfold before our eyes, we can see that the impact of COVID has indeed been most serious in those in poor health, in the poorest health. We've already seen the data coming out showing that diabetes and obesity doubles the risk, I think they're saying, of hospitalization and deaths. Of course, Boris Johnson, you'll have seen in the media, has made it his mission now, his war on obesity, recognizing for himself, who obviously came pretty perilously close to death, realized that his own situation could indeed have put himself at such a high risk himself. So we're finding indeed this is what COVID is showing us, and of course it's also highlighting some of the real fracture lines that we know exist in society. So I think the timing of the business coalition is right as we're living and experiencing this COVID crisis. We've all been affected in many ways, some more than others. But we've seen and some of the messaging that has come out and some of the core ideas that came out of the first roundtable, we're really seeing that health equals wealth, and indeed wealth equals health. And particularly, and of course, we particularly when we're thinking about well-being and social care, it's really highlighting the need to sort of strengthen our resilience as a nation, the resilience of our communities. So that's come out really, really strongly. And of course, better use of technology and care, better housing, and better public health. These are all the sorts of things that are really being sort of thrown into the spotlight. We're almost seeing, and I think we're seeing increasing calls. Of course, business and the economy is going to be suffering hugely, and of course there'll be a lot of attention, and it already obviously is a lot of attention on the fallout and addressing that as we go through. But I think we're seeing more and more sort of interest and sort of calls for this idea that this primacy of health over GDP that Andrew Scott actually even mentioned in our first roundtable, more important than ever, and looking to models from around the world. The Wellbeing Index in New Zealand, of course, has been highlighted a few times, and of course Jacinta Ardern in New Zealand is getting a lot of positive praise for how she's been dealing with the COVID crisis. We're seeing a lot about how can we, and there's been a lot of discussion about how can we really incentivize business to do what we know is good for the nation, for society. There's this growing imperative, and we talk a lot about this new social contract. What will that look like? And obviously our roundtable today will be trying to pull together some of the ideas that have come through, over the course of the 3 roundtables. And of course, one thing to really mention is we've had a huge amount of interest, of course, to participate. We've tried to make this a very open and participatory sort of forum. Not everyone can, we've had about 300 people sign up to the process. So we've tried to obviously allocate roles and active roles, observer roles, who can ask questions and obviously input, pre and post each of the roundtables. So we're really trying to listen to everyone, listen to all the voices, and capture everything as much as possible in coming up with our ideas. Clearly we see that business has a huge role to play in the design of this new world of work. That's been a huge topic of discussion. Professor Sarah Harper, who was involved in our second roundtable, she had a lot of really interesting ideas about age-integrated workforces, how the business community can come together around a new model for restructuring employment. What would be great to have greater flexibility, better employment for older workers, especially those with caring responsibilities. We've talked a lot about how business could have a much greater role in individual health management and personal sort of self-care. Things that doctors may find more difficult, which Mark Ashworth had mentioned, in terms of addressing BMI and obesity and weight loss, between patient and doctor might more easily be dealt with in terms of the employer sort of employee sort of relationship. So we had quite a lot of discussion around that. And a lot of discussion around, this is the time for change, that we don't want to waste the crisis. And obviously, the good thing, the good silver lining that can come out of this is, of course, an appetite for change. So in that sense, the timing of the roundtables is obviously incredibly timely. So I'm just going to just spend a few moments, one more minute or so, and I'm keeping my eye on the clock as well. Just a few of the chats, because we've been really the questions coming through in the chats, and of course the post-meeting evaluation forums have been so important and have really highlighted some great ideas, which we will feed into the final report. And of course our call to action, our 90-second sort of pitch. Which you may not have seen in the appendices of the key notes from the roundtables, but are definitely informing the process. The kind of values that have come out, particularly from the roundtable 3, we've talked a lot about kindness, bravery, resilience, solidarity. Localism is a really interesting one. Equality, collaboration, and agelessness. These are really coming out as strong sort of themes. While business is focused on survival, we do see some really interesting themes that have been talked about a lot in all the roundtables. Nutrition and diet and the food industry have come up over and over again. We've seen some great models of community sort of well-being initiatives. So David Luckin from the Co-op talked a lot about his community well-being index, which was fascinating. There's a lot of new businesses that are looking at this that Roland from Unlimited spoke about, for example, EcoQuare Co-op. There are many models from abroad, the UN AARP on age-friendly communities. There's a lot we can learn from abroad. There's a lot of discussion about local community resilience that we can look at perhaps moving forward. Carol Brain made some excellent points about this need for evidence and this idea of this forum that could bring academia, government, and third sector together. We talked a lot about having a need for a common language. What do we mean by aging and growing older? We need to promote this concept of age literacy and raise our expectations about aging. And this could be the tipping point. So I'm going to stop there, but just to say, there's been a huge amount of very valuable feedback coming through from everybody. From our lead discussants, our breakout rooms, and indeed all the observers, who've been supporting us with their questions and feedback. So we're going to start our discussion scene setting with our lead discussants. So I'm going to start first with Richard Lloyd, who is founding trustee of Money and Mental Health and former executive director of Which, and he'll be telling us a little bit about the work that he's been doing to give us some inspiration. So Richard, I'm going to ask you to start first. Are you there?
I'm here, thanks Steve.
Excellent, Richard. Over to you, 4 minutes.
I'll be very short. And I've just come from the boardroom, which is an organisation that's responsible for 4,500 people. And number one on the agenda is how to keep staff and customers healthy and well. And organisations across the country are having exactly this conversation in their boardrooms. So as I came here, I thought incredibly timely. Let's not waste a crisis. And I'm going to concentrate my comments on what I've seen work, in particular in building coalitions that have an impact. And obviously in the past I've been responsible for smaller, more specific initiatives like the Which Best Buy. With Money and Mental Health, we've just been launching an accreditation for businesses that can demonstrate they're meeting the needs of customers with mental health problems. But of course there are a huge number of other examples that we all know that are based on specific harms or consumer demand, fair trade, sustainable timber, the living wage, and globally social responsibility initiatives backed by the UN, the Global Compact. So forming a coalition of businesses recognising the crucial role they can play in bringing about change is tried and tested. And in all the initiatives I've been involved in, either globally or in the UK, there have been some common ingredients that have led to success. By success, by what works, I mean coalitions that have had a measurable positive impact on society delivered through business or by the way business does business. The key ingredients that I would put top of the list are these. First of all, is there a really clearly defined specific goal that you can be confident will have a tangible impact? If it's too high level a goal, trying to do too much, trying to work too hard, however laudable and conceptually sound that might be, too high level will have too little meaning, in particular to consumers, and risks being lost in the fog of greenwash or CSR wash. So I would strongly counsel specific, clearly defined common goals. Secondly, within that, what are the standards or commitments that can be externally validated, that are simple enough for consumers to be assured of the legitimacy of that commitment? Can it be communicated through a simple brand, for example? And is there an incentive, as you mentioned, Tina? What is going to be the incentive for participation by firms? Will it give a competitive advantage, for example, consumer loyalty? Or will it bring other competitive advantages? The standards or commitments that sit underneath that goal, clearly really crucial. Thirdly, initiatives that have worked have had really intensive engagement with firms and consumers from the outset in design. So ensuring that the model still makes sense to consumers, that it's robust, that it will have credibility, that it speaks to the needs of consumers and will work with firms, has some form of mechanism for external accreditation or validation, and a mechanism for owning that brand, potentially for licensing it, as we do with which. I think obviously of those, the toughest is the first one, the clear, specific goal, defined in a way that will bring about some tangible impact. But from that, and with commitment from enough core players in business, and without trying to change the whole world today that we would all want to, I think the time is right now for a coalition of the kinds that's been discussed in the previous workshops. How that then links to an index and how that might incentivise action, I think others are much more expert to speak on.
Excellent.
And those key ingredients, those are the things I'd urge everyone to focus on.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Richard. That was really, really insightful. So Rachel Neiman, I would like you to go next. And of course, you've got an incredible sort of background, which you can probably speak much better than myself. But of course, you're very, very well known and been very active in citizen participation, digital literacy, with all your various sort of roles. So over to you, Rachel.
Thanks a lot, Tina, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to look at the impact of digital technology on healthier lives in the context of COVID-19 and how this could be amplified by a business coalition around Healthier Lives. The COVID-19 pandemic and the introduction of social distancing has pushed digital solutions to the very top of the agenda for organisations and citizens alike. And it's been said that we've made more progress in digital transformation in the last 2 months than we have in the last 2 years, which is incredible and just shows what can be done in extremes. And as someone who spent most of my career on digital transformation for social good, I'm absolutely delighted to see this. And this explosion of digital is absolutely fine for those that can access, afford, and have the skills to use that digital technology. But 1.9 million households in the UK have no internet access at all. And 1 in 5 UK adults, 11.9 million people, don't have all the 5 essential digital skills that are considered to be the necessary benchmark for digital literacy. It so happens that on Thursday, Lloyds Bank will launch their 2020 Consumer Digital Index, and it'll be interesting to see if this figure has changed in any way and how it varies by demographic. And I'll come back to demographic shortly. With the current pandemic, unemployment is rising and many people are in furlough. And as a result, more are having to choose between buying food and topping up the data on their phone to stay connected. Track and trace apps are seen as critical to controlling COVID-19. But how do those who can't access the app self-report and keep themselves safe? For the most vulnerable, many of whom are older people shielded at home, not having access to the internet means they're essentially cut off from the very services that are designed to support them. How then do we square that circle? And time and again I hear people make assumptions that digital literacy is age-related and that once the older generation dies off, digital exclusion will be a thing of the past. But this is absolutely not the case. Young people are becoming more and more excluded as socioeconomic factors play an increasing role in digital inclusion. Because the young digital have-nots simply cannot afford what the young digital haves can. And social and financial exclusion are now being seamlessly joined by digital exclusion. So there's a real danger, I think, that in the same way that the pandemic has exposed the link between health inequalities and social inequalities, it's also going to expose how access to and confidence around technology can become a divider and not the equaliser that we often expect it to be. So these are some of the areas I would like to see be in scope for a business coalition for healthier lives. Because business, like all other sectors, has a responsibility to address this inequality if we're going to remain productive as an economy and adapt to a post-pandemic new normal. Access to digital resources has been proven time and again to improve health and well-being. Good Things Foundation has done a lot of work on this in conjunction with the NHS. And the benefits of being connected are clear for loneliness and social isolation, and again, very well evidenced. The Future.Now coalition of private companies and civil society groups is currently working to motivate more people and businesses across the UK to boost their digital skills, starting with those most vulnerable to COVID-19. And in fact, they've got a big campaign on just this week, which they're calling Digital Skills Week. So I think that co-producing strategies and sharing resources with these sorts of groups could go a long way towards joining up and strengthening the many existing grassroots efforts that are already trying to improve quality of life. Because no one sector or organisation can create longer, healthier lives by themselves. So let's work across the sectors with organisations that are already making progress to reduce silos, increase impact, and accelerate the outcome we all want to see. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Very well articulated some of the arguments that we need to address. So next up is Professor Les Mayhew, Professor of Statistics at Cass Business School, who, he will share with you some of his experience, but is an expert on understanding data and harnessing data. So over to you, Les.
Thanks, Tina. So improving the health of the workforce and enabling them to work for longer is, of course, an exceptionally worthy aim, but there are practical details to consider, so I just wanted to go through some of these. One thinks of the myriad of business and population surveys available. One also thinks of the systems already in place for monitoring businesses. You yourself have mentioned a few. But I think statistics are there to be repurposed, and there's a lot of stuff out there. It's about goals and aims, how information is presented and what users do with it. My approach, I suppose, is akin to how a government statistician or economist might approach the problem, but of course with a few tweaks. My premise is that the business coalition will need some sort of shared information system, ideally UK-wide, adding value by firstly pointing to practices that are good for health and society, telling businesses something useful they didn't know and couldn't find out easily for themselves, where they sit in relation to similar businesses for benchmarking purposes, and also potentially a means of rewarding practice. Now, crucially, this system should be externally as well as internally focused. What businesses do for the local community as well. A business index, one of the concepts here, may be the wrong term, I think, because it implies a single index like GDP to measure something that is multidimensional. So, for example, we're used to life expectancy and we're getting used to the concept of healthy life expectancy. So that's already 2 indexes. How about adding a third, like working life expectancy, so we can compare each index with the other, and so it goes on. How to go about it? Well, I think the first question is what we mean by a business. For example, there are well over 2 million registered businesses, the vast majority of which are one man and his dog. Rather than reinvent the wheel, I would suggest using something like the ONS standard industrial classification to sort businesses into sectors, groups, by size, type, whether they're manufacturing, public sector, and so on. Now, it seems to me that using a system which has got base information in it, a business could self-evaluate by measuring itself against the average, the sector, the subsector, or locality where it sits, and also against best practice. We'll of course find that some businesses will be too small to make an impact apart from giving employment, which of course is important. Now, I envisage a mix of internal and external measures based on the business's contribution to the health of the communities in which it sits. So internal measures might focus on health, age structures, length of service, absenteeism, pay representation, and so on. And these could be benchmarked against similar businesses or all businesses generally. For me, external measures are the value businesses bring to the community in terms of their spending power and their multiplier effects on jobs and health. So a business located in a deprived area with a high multiplier effect will do more good than one located in a more affluent area with a low multiplier effect. building a new car park plant in Sunderland will have a bigger impact on health than a plant located in a leafy Well Hills area such as Surrey. So other external measures that we could consider would include things like the carbon footprint of a business, its impact on air quality, or its impact on community engagement, such as supporting local businesses, housing, leisure facilities, and so on. So I think, that's the broad shape of what I've been thinking about. But I want to make a final comment on our statistics. Statistics are a powerful tool for spotlighting issues, as we've seen in COVID, but our systems are out of date. COVID has highlighted a few long-standing problems. One is that our population stats are nearly 10 years out of date. The next census is in 2021. Will it show, for example, that we have 2 million more people than we thought? I think there's a good chance. Were we worrying unnecessarily about the drop in life expectancy, or not worrying enough? We will have to wait until 2023 to find out. So we urgently need to exploit administrative sources which deliver data annually or even quarterly. But even more important, we need to exploit the value in our health databases and repurpose them to measure health and not just the consumption of healthcare. Medical records are a goldmine of valuable information about health, especially if they're repackaged and linked to other data.
Les, you have to close, I'm afraid, because you're...
I know, I've got my last sentence, which
Okay,
is
perfect.
Claire. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Les. Really insightful and very focused on the how and the practicalities, which is often the hardest part. Next is Professor Lynn Cox from Oxford, who's been very involved throughout the development of the Health and Nation strategy, and will give us some insight on the biological front. And from a position of, congratulations on the £1 million grant that you've just received in your unit. Congratulations, Lynn. Over to you.
Thank you, Tina. Right, so I'm going to turn the question upside down and start with the business index for health first. So you can see in the background I've put some little prompts up there. I agree with Les that this needs to include a wide variety of indicators. So in my view, a health index should be a composite of multiple different readouts of health. And these include quite broad categories like financial health, so including high quality employment and sufficient financial resources to live healthily, emotional health, including social connectedness and family well-being, societal health, so that's the environment we live in, and our values as well, educational health that informs good life choices and provides lifelong work opportunities, and then biological health, which I'll go into a bit more. So in terms of biological health, this has to be more than simply an absence of disease. And I'm suggesting that we adopt the term health resilience, which is essentially the ability to bounce back after injury or illness, because we can't eliminate those entirely. But we know that resilience drops as we age, and elder people tend to move to a state of dependency after illness, after the type of illness that a young person could simply bounce back from. So we need to have measures of biological health resilience, and these can include what we normally do, which are disease state and clinical blood tests, scans, various things like that. Markers of health rather than disease, so derived through studies such as UK Biobank, medical records, as Les has pointed out. Anonymised data from big companies such as Sweatcoin and Fitbit should be included. We also need to assess immune health, so how well our body's own defences can deal with infection. This usually diminishes with age, but we know that it's possible to support the ageing immune system to help slow its decline. And then we need to measure biomarkers of age-related changes and early-stage disease. These can provide alerts before the disease is established. For example, it's now possible to look for markers of Alzheimer's decades before the loss of brain cells shows up as dementia. So this makes early treatment possible before loss of function. So moving to a business coalition, I think the purpose should be to improve health resilience across all those categories. The needs, obviously, it's been discussed in all the round tables. And partners who haven't been included up to now, and I think I would urge inclusion, are universities, biotech and pharma, and health and social care providers, which we might not think of as businesses, but they are all big business. Universities employ 3% of the UK population and contribute about 95 billion a year gross output to the UK economy. And they seem to offer to me our best hope of coming out with health in a world of COVID through developing vaccines and drugs and informing on behavioural and social interventions. Pharma and biotech make enormous contributions to the UK economy and healthcare and have shown agility in the face of COVID and willingness to collaborate. And examples come from the AstraZeneca collaboration with the University of Oxford on vaccines. And then the NHS is the country's largest employer with 1.5 million staff. As a business, it needs to consider training its nurses as graduate apprentices, removing tuition fees which serve as a barrier to recruitment. It would cost about £2.4 billion a year, but this can be offset against the £5.8 billion a year currently spent on bank and agency staff to cover staff shortages. As a business, the care sector is huge, and I would urge that carer pay is raised above visa thresholds to allow for recruitment and retention of foreign workers and to provide incentives to the younger people to enter the profession. And I believe that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to establish a national care service responsible for nationwide provision of quality care homes and community care integrated closely with the NHS. Funding could be provided through a hypothecated care tax, Beveridge 2.0, but it could also be co-funded with contribution from businesses, so that you don't lose staff to part-time working, stress or caring responsibilities, and businesses that contribute could be rewarded with kite mark recognition. Thank you.
Excellent, and even with 3 seconds to spare, excellent. Thank you so much, Lynn. So thank you. Some very, very interesting, very specific and precise ideas that we can take a look at. So thank you so much, Lynn, for that. Fascinating, the range of different elements that we can be looking at in this group, and also highlighting the importance of the cross-sector collaboration. And this theme has been coming up over and over again. So next up is Professor Ian Buchan, who's the Executive Dean and Professor of Public Health and Clinical Informatics at the University of Liverpool, who's also been involved in the Health and Nation work and has some really interesting experience with civic data cooperatives, and has been very involved in mobilising his local community with COVID, which he'll share with you now. So Ian, can I give the stage to you now, please? Ian Buchan?
Thank you, Tina.
There you are. Excellent. Thanks, Ian.
So, yes, as a public health physician and data scientist, I'm diving out of other work into this meeting, and it's very live to me. The issues we talked about of civic data cooperatives, and we have been discussing for over a year, have suddenly become hugely important in the ability of local populations to take control measures to save lives, livelihoods, and life chances. I really want to look at some of those inequalities, particularly across the life course, and how a whole community responds in a way that we would like to see the kind of relationships in those quadruple helix of industry, academia, government, and citizenry have suddenly become very concentrated in the COVID-19 response. Where I sit in Liverpool, half of my neighbourhoods are in the 10th most deprived in England. Across the north of England, premature mortality under 75 death rates are 20% higher than in the south of England. And on my walk to work every day, it's about a 13-year gap in life expectancy I walk. So it's very real when I sit with the Metropolitan Mayor and we talk about inclusive growth, and we think how to incentivise that wealth and well-being, reciprocity. I'd echo earlier speakers, there's no simple index. Even a multi-dimensional index could be very complex because there's causality, wealth leading to health, and there's reverse causality, a healthy workforce being more productive and leading to wealth. Untangling that, ironically, we don't have the data and the resolution we need to unpick the dynamics of whole health systems and population health to give you the answer on the ideal index. But I can spot the gaps in the market that are felt acutely now. And those gaps are where biology, behaviour and environment interact. where personal health care and the data required for personal health management meet population health management, brought into a snapper focus with COVID-19. If I look at the data that are coming through across the lower tier local authorities across England, there's a 1.5% increase in COVID-19 hospital mortality rates for every 1% increase in income deprivation in those areas. Just looking at all-cause mortality across Liverpool, we have a 30% higher than expected all-cause mortality death rate, resulting not only from the responses to COVID-19, but from the control measures and widening inequalities. Thinking about national data solutions, yes, of course they're needed, but national policies don't always fit. We saw education debates on Sunday. At the same time, the R value in the north of England was 0.7 and in the south of England was 0.4, and London was 0.4. So context really matters, and data are enriched when context is really understood. We've been working direct with citizens on data. Some of the early warning from behavioural information, such as self-reported non-compliance with social distancing, predicted an 11% subsequent increase in symptoms. Now, these are data feeds that can be borrowed for the whole population. Everyone doesn't need to take part, but the benefits of that need to be cooperative and need to serve the new opportunities post-COVID recovery. So one thing I would urge is incentives for health tech businesses in the most deprived communities that have had to respond with alacrity and will be dealing with the consequences of COVID-19 for many years. Thank you.
Oops, sorry, I was muted for some reason. Yes, there's a noise from one of the participants on the, so someone could just close that down. So thank you so much, Ian. Very well articulated and doing very, very important work and learning from what has been playing out in the COVID crisis. So next up, a slightly different perspective from Matt Connell, who's the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Personal Finance Society. He wears a few hats. So Matt, can I hand over to you?
Hi Tina, thank you very much. And what I'm going to try and do is really just build on what some of the previous speakers have said, rather. So there's so much good input already. I've rewritten what I wanted to write a few times already before even talking. But I think there's probably two real things that I want to focus on. First, Rachel, absolutely right, making that impression be for greater digital skills. I think equally, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, health and relationship between health and wealth. And equally important is the development of financial skills. In talking about that 13-year walk in terms of life expectancy on his way into work. And we live in a country where 29% of people feel that they'll never be able to save for a rainy day, and 42% say that they're worse off since coming into retirement, worse off in a period of their lives when they're going to face some of the biggest financial challenges in terms of things like paying for care. So there's a huge gap between financial skills that people need to lead healthier lives, and to really understand how they can do this. I know Ben Franklin's on this call. I noticed, and with his work, the International Longevity Centre did an enormous piece of work showing that with financial advice, even people with less than average earnings can be £40,000 better off on retirement. So alongside the need for digital skills, I think for the need for financial skills. And then secondly, I think the idea of the index and the need for it to be multi-dimensional, I think that really is important. Just a headline figure with no explanation behind it just becomes a hostage to whoever wants to use that headline figure to advance whatever vested interest they want to talk about. And we need an index whose headline can be drilled down into underlying causes. And I think in particular, an index that champion boring things that never get looked at. So, for example, in healthcare, we see multiple TV dramas about heroic surgeons saving lives. We never see a TV series about somebody getting a good night's sleep and eating the right diet. And equally, on the financial side, we see multiple programs about financial whiz kids and investment bankers playing markets and becoming fantastically wealthy, but we never see anything about people patiently and slowly, gradually accumulating wealth throughout their lifetime and taking out as simple as contents insurance to make sure they avoid financial disaster. So I think on those two elements, absolutely essential to have an index that incorporates financial skills, and absolutely essential to look at the kind of conversations people have, how people get into good habits and bad habits around the really basic, everyday, ordinary things like sleep and diet and budgeting, things that get overlooked in sort of more dramatic headlines that we encounter day to day.
Fabulous, Matt. That was excellent, and another picked aside of another part of the puzzle that we need to look at: financial literacy and skills. So we've got our final lead discussant, John Godfrey, who, of course, many of you will know. He's been involved throughout this sort of process, and of course, extremely involved also with the development of the national strategy last year. He first presented the idea of the risk management framework akin to what we have in climate change, and also just to say he's Legal and General obviously have been very active in direct investments in healthy aging, and has just been awarded a grant from Innovate UK, which is wonderful news. So over to you, John.
Well, thanks, Tina. The way you started this, I think, was absolutely spot on today, in that you highlighted that even with COVID, this is not a question of health versus wealth, it's health equals wealth, and that's true at a societal level, and also to a very large extent true or correlated at an individual level. What we're trying to do here as part of the APPG is to build health resilience in the country as manifested through healthier, longer healthy life expectancies. I thought at this kind of fourth roundtable session, I would just try and expand a little bit on the parallels between what we're trying to do here about healthy life expectancy and societal health and what business has been doing around climate, because I think there's a very clear sort of parallel. With climate, the way I see it is that we've been through, broadly speaking, 3 stages. And I'm talking about big business and the shifting of large amounts of capital here. First stage, going back maybe 10 or more years, the people who are interested in this and were doing it, the ESG investing and specific green finance, were a pretty small group regarded as somewhat fringe and slightly eccentric. We're now going through the second stage, which I think was manifested by this becoming much more widespread, by the proliferation of different ideas about how to measure and how to create indices and form coalitions, a slightly Darwinian process, frankly, and a process that gets used sometimes by people for genuine reasons to report better, and sometimes for less genuine greenwash type reasons. As we go into the third stage, I think we reach a point where this is almost universal. It's very unusual to find people investing now who don't care about climate at all. And the metrics and the practices around this and the reporting of it are becoming increasingly standardized and agreed upon. So I think that's a really good step forward. They are science-driven, if you like. Now, we I think, need to try and develop the same thing around health. And there are really essentially 2 reasons why businesses need to take this extremely seriously. And I move here away from anything to do with principles or because it's the right thing to do, but purely because this relates to how do you invest capital to manage risk competently and to allocate capital so that it derives you the best possible reasonable returns in line with that risk. So this is a straightforward commercial approach to doing this. And I think if we can formulate codes, if you like, or guidance about how those two things get done, and we're better in the climate world at looking at the risk and the stranded asset risks and the transition risks and all the rest of it than we are, frankly, at looking at the opportunities that will come. If we can do the same thing around healthy life expectancy and societal health, and we can report on it in the same way that businesses now increasingly report on climate through their TCFD, which is not yet mandatory, but I believe it will be soon, then I think we can make a real step forward. Because in the same way that, maybe 30 years ago, investment in tobacco was absolutely fine and mainstream, investment in brown coal was absolutely fine and mainstream, we can take this kind of thing forward where we see the parallels between, for example, investing on the climate side in diesel vehicles as opposed to electric vehicles, and on the health side, investing in enhanced sugar, fast versus healthier alternative. I think we just need to pull those things out. Now, this kind of framework involves quite a lot of analysis. It involves picking those targets, measuring them, reporting them. You could say it is very painful for small businesses. The role of big business is to drive this down or up, whichever way you think of it, the supply chain, and help the small businesses get there. So I'll stop there because I think I've reached my time.
You have, but just a couple of seconds. So thank you so much, John. So some a very specific concept that we can look at. There have been a few concepts which have come through, and now is the time in our breakout group discussions to look at some of these specific ideas. And so I ask the breakout group facilitators to try and be as specific and precise with some of the ideas from your breakout groups. I will also just to remind you just to record on your phone, if you can't record locally on your laptop, just to record the discussion. And I hope this will be very seamless and the right people will go into each of the breakout rooms. It is prerogative of the breakout group facilitators to also involve observers if they so wish. So you've got 20 minutes. There will be a countdown clock, with a minute, that will remind you have a minute left. So with that, I'm going to ask Paul and Terry to assemble us into the breakout groups, and we'll re-emerge in 20 minutes. I'm in the right room, so that's a good start. Excellent. So, Julia, over to you.
This looks like quite a full breakout room. Super. So, just to introduce myself, I'm Julia Randall-Kahn. I'm a consulting fellow at the Stanford University Center on Longevity, which some of you may know. We focus on the redesign of life.
Question, which is all about the lead, the purpose, and the scope for a business coalition.
Oh.
Had an interruption on the sound.
How strange. Hold on, I'm just going to...
Sounds like we've been...
I'm just going to ask, I'll just do a chat. I'm just going to send a chat.
From Carol, Clock Black.
Oh.
Right.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay.
Sorry, Julia.
Just basically saying hello, and I'm Julia Randall-Kahn from the Stanford University on Longevity. And at the centre we have a programme called the New Map of Life, which is all about redesigning life for century-long life that everyone. And so we're looking at this on an interdisciplinary basis, but reflecting many of the conversations we've had today around looking at education, work, environment, healthcare, housing, financial sector, and also the new narrative that needs to wrap around this as we make these interventions. So I'd like to welcome our discussants today. I think we're going to be hearing from 4 people, but from different perspectives. So from HR, from transport and mobility, cognition, and then also from well-being. And you've got a couple of minutes, just 2 minutes, to address our central, which is really the need, the purpose and scope of the business coalition and the index. And we've had a fantastic scene setting from the discussants today. So 2 minutes, if you could just say one sentence on your name and your organisation and then address the question. So
And
could I draw first?
Julia, can I just interrupt very quickly? Just so you know, Chris Jeffries has joined as a 5th participant at the last minute, just so you know.
Oh, super.
Yeah.
Super.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
No worries. So perhaps I could draw on Yvonne first. Yvonne, are you on? Yes, you're Yvonne. Yvonne is from an HR background, so it probably go Yvonne first, and then Andy, Martin, Helen, and then Yvonne.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Saxon. I'm the head of HR at Vista Employer Services. We provide employment law, advice, management training, employee relations services to predominantly large organisations. So I'm kind of here with an internal HR hat on and an insider view on a variety of organisations. I suppose my focus is very, very, very practical in that these kind of coalitions quite often are quite heavy on academics and public sector. No offence to that, but it's very, very difficult to get businesses engaged in this kind of thing. And I think stakeholders that need to be involved are unions, trade bodies, and even getting occupational health involved in this, because they have that inside line on what's going on inside an organisation and outside and vice versa. So I think it's really key to do that, to get the take-up from businesses rather than think it's not for them and it's something academic. I suppose in the medium term, is there going to be an appetite for this when businesses and government are grappling with the after effects of COVID and the costs that kind of come from that? So funding may well be an issue in terms of getting business take-up. So it's looking at how do we get that incentivisation going there. And how does this fit with the Charter for Good Work? Because there's lots of reference in that around well-being and health as well. So it's getting those messages across to businesses.
What was the reference you referred to there, Yvonne?
The Charter for Good Work.
Charter for Good Work, thank you.
So because there's lots and lots of references within the Charter for Good Work that sit around health and well-being. So, how does that fit together? And I think businesses will really need to understand why is this different and what's in it for them. Looking at some of the core principles in this, I think for a practical sense, we should be thinking about, are employers paying people a living wage to enable them to live more healthily? What approaches have been taken to reduce sickness absence and facilitate people coming back to work? How do they approach employee fitness and well-being? The approaches to enabling older people to stay in work if they wish. Educating line managers, what's their role in enabling people to live healthily and their well-being?
Yeah, thank you very much, Yvonne. I mean, tremendously practical, tangible ideas there. I'm sure we'll come back to some of that. Sorry to have to cut you off, but I'd really like to hear from the other participants as well. Andy, could I come to you? Is Andy on the...
Yeah, I'm here.
Andy, yes, because you've got an interesting perspective from the mobility and transport perspective. So Andy, over to you.
Well, partly from mobility and transport. I mean, I represent SOSTRANS. I'm the director of Insight SOSTRANS. SOSTRANS is a charity that does walking, cycling projects. So that on the one hand, I've got a question about the not-for-profit section. Where do charities stand in the context of the indices that we might be talking about? What's our role? How can we contribute? How can we get involved? There's a whole set of questions around that, but also the mobility element of it, that kind of question of so the thing that's happened, the big news on the transport front recently, obviously in the light of COVID, is the way that we're using transport now to get around, not using transport to get around, significant investment in walking and cycling to enable mobility in cities, and all of a sudden you've got a question of the resilience of cities and very significant levels of investment that we just haven't really seen before on a scale that's being talked about now. I mean, but beyond that, you need to help support businesses to understand. I think that businesses do understand that they're responsible for the transport and mobility that they generate, whether it be the things that they're responsible for moving around or the people getting to the places that they need to get to do their work. From a SOSTRANS perspective, we're very interested in supporting active travel above other modes of travel, but how do we engage with businesses to help them to understand what they're responsible for and what their responsibilities are in terms of changing that. I mean, beyond that, there are more elements of our work that are not so much transport, or not immediately transport-related, questions about localism, questions about placemaking, and that wider kind of set of social issues that underpin the wellness or well-being of place, and how we can support business to recognise that kind of thing. On the subject of the index, I just find I'm not sure whether I'm completely on the same page or whether I'm completely on the same page by the index, whether it's kind of a national index, whether it's a city index, or whether it's a company index. And I think I'd really like to get to understand that a bit better, to the very high level of the individual business stuff, and how you articulate that in terms of all of those different factors. Are we talking about, traffic light systems in the way that we have sugar and salt in breakfast cereals? Are you talking about having something like that on the logo of the company, for example?
Yes, very, very practical, thoughtful ideas there, Andy. Thank you. So moving on to Martin. I'm not looking at my directory here as to whether Martin is with us. I think probably not. Martin from Dementia Organisation.
He doesn't look to be, so you can move to the next one.
Helen, you're very much the bigger picture of well-being. What's your perspective on the need, purpose, and scope of a business code and business?
Yes, thank you. So I'm quite new to this group, as it were. I have sat on all the table discussions, but and I come at this as well from a well-being perspective, but also having been a carer for both my parents, and I'm no longer caring for them as such, so I come with that my insight as well, if you like, and I come with a background in education. So my area of interest really is around the mind, body and space. And just to come up with a few things just building on what we've said, one of my things is really around the whole notion of well-being to world-being. I believe that often we see it as an individual thing, but actually it's very much more now brought into the social domain and as a collective. And obviously, as others have said, we can break well-being down into the emotional, physical, social, workplace and societal. I think there are a few just points to put on the table, if you like. We are in a tremendous period of change, but it is a different story for everybody. And I think what I'm realising in my work, I do a lot of work in mental health as well, well-being, is that there's grief at different stages, of course, for people. A lot of people are grieving for the life they might have had, they want to get back to normal, and others are grieving for loss. And I think that needs to be all brought into the support that's on offer for people transitioning back into work as well. Because also a lot of people I'm working with are very, very exhausted. They're carers, they're also teaching their children. So there's those aspects at a more practical level and some of the inequalities, if you like. I think moving to some of the positives, of course, what's been mentioned previously, I think that kindness, and we are on Mental Health Awareness Week and Kindness Matters, and actually how that can be as a values-based test included within our policies, so the kindness, equality, dignity and respect. I think in terms of space, when I talk about space, obviously it's very prevalent on many levels, but I think we've seen I believe a very positive integration of the merging between work and home is much more integrated. So what I mean by that is that people are sharing their stories more. And so I think that means that as a result of that I remember my own journey of loneliness being a carer, but I think that those conversations are much more in the domain, and I think that therefore people are able to be more authentic. So as a result of that, we can build on that in terms of creativity and innovation. I think the other piece, just to add as well, in terms of my area of interest in terms of positive aging is also around the body leading the way. I think that a lot of people I'm working with going, just as one example, going to classes was very important as part of their overall well-being and connecting with other people. That's changing because obviously they're not going to necessarily be available in the next months to come. So how can we work in a different way around this to ensure that people have fun while getting fit or being fit or whatever the right expression is. So I think that's really important. Also, the other thing just to end on, I think, which is, again, in terms of my positive psychology background, is this communities of resilience and well-being at a local level. And those local models, the co-op was mentioned, but I think this is for all ages. This is actually key, so that actually it isn't just, we're looking from birth right the way through in terms of the reframing and reconnecting around some of these things that are in place. There's much wonderful stuff that's out there, but I think a lot of more meaningful and real conversations are coming to the forefront, which in my work can only be a positive.
Thank you very much, Helen. A lot of points there. And I'd just like to bring in now Chris, who's joined us as well. Chris Jeffrey, is that right? You're on mute, Chris.
I've just
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. The last 11 years I've been campaigning for paid care leave for those juggling work and caring for, working in the private sector and caring for a family member or disabled or elderly family member. And 30 years ago, following on from what Helen was saying, I actually cared for my father. And I just believe you need a lifelong policy for all companies to ensure that everyone is catered for throughout their working life, to make sure that there is no stop, so everyone has a chance to go back to work if they need to. Does that make sense, Julia?
Can you just elaborate on how you see that, on the practicalities of that, Chris?
Right, say some, like you have with people taking up maternity leave or paternity leave.
Yes.
If you had a carer's leave, they could go, if they need a carer's break as well as carer's leave, they could be able to return to work. And it would be beneficial so they know the routine of work, they know all the situations, so it's nothing new and nothing strange to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so sort of expanding the range of policies that people have for coming in and out of work because of different reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And, so I get nervous.
That's fine, no, we've got a friendly audience here, Chris.
It just thinks, post-COVID, I think with carers leave is going to be more essential because social care and the NHS is going to be massively recovering from what's been a nightmare scenario. So the less emphasis on NHS and social care, then there's more chance that with working family carers having a chance that there's support for them with carers leave, they can continue with and there'd be less of a burden and less burden on NHS, mental health services, and as I said, social care services.
Yes, if we have that in place. Yes, no, really, really good point. Really good point. Well, thank you so much for our extra sort of perspectives there from different angles. And I think we've got about 5 minutes left for our conversation. I'm very aware we've got some very experienced observers in our group as well. And perhaps I could just call on a couple of people if they'd like to make an observation. I mean, I just see Alice Kirby there, who's has a very interesting role, having been a medic and also now at Select Accenture. I mean, Alice, if you wanted to make any observations from your perspective.
I think it's all fascinating. I wonder. I think the key thing that we have to get to is kind of those really practical approaches. So a bit like Chris was going there, that it's a great example of the equivalent with maternity leave. Like, what are the other ways that we can move in and move out of the workforce? And I think there's a real world that we're coming to, which is, I don't want to sound negative, but there is a massive recession that we're facing. The commercial pressures on businesses are going to be huge. We have to make sure that this isn't all forgotten at the same time as all that is happening. Terrifying, the terrifying reality of employment is going to overwhelm a lot of people. So how do we kind of get those practical things in before all that really kicks in is what I'm thinking, I guess.
Yes, no, that's a really good point. I mean, from the people in our breakout room, are there any other observations that you'd like to make, sort of building on the points that our group has said, or any of the points made by the discussants at the beginning of the meeting. Any other? We've also got the benefit of Les in our group as well. But any other observations, or going back to our participants in this call, any additional points you'd like to make?
Can you hear me, Gina? I've got
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. This is the first time I've attended, so apologies if my points have been also reflected previously. I work very closely with small businesses, and I'm very keen to see businesses do more by technology for the workforce. There are lots of simple technologies such as blood pressure monitors, atrial fibrillation monitors, and other devices that they can invest in with their health and safety programs, but nobody seems to think about these things as part of their standard kits. And yet these devices are extremely valuable for employees to self-assess or be encouraged to be assessed. And I would like to see a little bit more promotion to employers of these devices, because there's a serious lack of education on medical devices for employers. Yes. On the employment front, there are standards for social responsibility. I'll name just one, which is the Organisation for Responsible Businesses. There's a lot of reference to responsible businesses in the reports you've created. But it would be very nice for employers to see what standards do exist in this area, and for some comparison to be made between these standards, so that employers can perhaps choose those ones which are most suitable for them. The final point is I work in the health technology sector on innovation products, and I'm very keen for innovation products to be tested more effectively by employers. A lot of work been done in the last few years on microcurrent technology devices, wearables, which do actually have a very good record of positive impact by the users, and indeed on homeopathic supplements, which also, like microcurrent, can boost immune systems. And immune system boosting is a really important part of health for the community as well as for staff. So those are the few points I'd like to make. Thank you.
No, really useful. Thank you very much, Clive. Very, very, very useful. I think we've got about another sort of minute and a half left, but is there anyone else who'd like to make any further observations from your perspectives? Because one of the beautiful things about these working groups is that we've got so many different perspectives, offering suggestions and ideas. Is that
Julia, it's Eileen from the What Work Centre for Wellbeing.
Eileen, yes, please.
Hi. I'd like to go back to the point that Richard Lloyd was making from Which. My interest is very much around how do we set, almost an accreditation system, a set of standards that companies have to report against. My background is 20 years in corporate responsibility, and I do know that when there is a standard that has been co-created by all the stakeholders in the value chain, it is more likely to be adhered to. And it's something that people are going to aim for. It's a benchmark, and people don't want to be laggards and be left behind. So whilst I do think John Godfrey makes some good points about reflecting how this was achieved for climate, I actually don't think they were fringe and eccentric. I think they were the opportunistic ones who actually saw the cost savings of addressing climate change because of the savings they made from energy, waste and water. You don't make immediate savings when you address well-being in the workplace. What you do in the medium term and longer term perhaps is increase retention, attraction and productivity. But that can take a little while. At first, it involves investment. But having said that, I do think that in many discussions around carbon and climate change, we can literally take that word out, replace it with well-being, and we're having the same discussion we had 10 years ago, which is good news because we should be able to learn.
Yes, really. That's a very insightful point, and thank you very much, Eileen, for mentioning that. I think we're going to be going back to our main breakout room in about 30 seconds, but I just want to thank you very much, everyone, for sharing so clearly your perspectives on this discussion, which I'm sure will add to the bigger debate and collation of ideas and perspectives that the APP is looking for. So thank you very much, and we just have to click on return to main session, and we'll go back to the main forum. Thank you very much.
Yeah, whether you click or not, you'll be hoisted back anyway. So thanks, Julia. So I think, oops. So I think we're in the process of reassembling. I think we're all here. So I hope, yes, I think we're all back now. We're doing fairly well on time. We're running a little bit behind schedule. So let's gallop ahead. We've got 2 minutes from each of the breakout room facilitators to debrief us on what emerged. So I'm going to start with our first group, Chris Steele. Chris, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Tina. Yes, it worked very well with technology. Fantastic.
Excellent.
And great contributions from everyone, and apologies to those who didn't get to contribute. So I will do my best to summarise, Tina, that there was a number of points raised. The first one, interestingly, we started with the very strong connection between the need for a business coalition and the need for the Business Health Index.
Mm-hmm.
It's the point that was discussed in the opening remarks from some, which was the need for measurement and the need for reporting to drive change, which I think is a very, very key point. And akin to that, the build on the ESG parallels, and that is a very, very strong message. I think that is a success that, if replicated, I think has got a huge value to it. I think the points that John Godfrey was making there are very, very good in that this becomes non-optional. There's no debate there, and you see how that debate has moved on in the recent years around the ESG and the green reporting agenda. If we are to create similar success here, it would be absolutely fantastic. So I think there's a lot to be explored on that particular theme around the parallels there. If we come specifically to the question of the business coalition and the aim and the purpose, we had a conversation about prevention, and there's a good contribution there from William around prevention and an ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure. And the obvious analogy there to the COVID crisis, which I know you've explored in the previous workshops, the fact that if we can't learn lessons from COVID on this, it should be so blindingly obvious that there is no better message as to why this is important than the way that we've currently dealt with COVID and some of the delays that have occurred and the attempts to preserve the economy, which have effectively backfired by not taking those preventative steps. And so that we thought was quite a apposite aim, I think, for the business coalition to try and achieve. And then I guess finally, I'll try and wrap up after that, because I know you've got to get around everybody else, try and keep it to 2 minutes. Then it's a question of how you do that, and how and what this coalition would do. There is a point around driving innovation here, but there's also a point around trying to amplify those cycles of success around piloting, around testing ideas, and building on what is seen to be successful, getting ones on the board and then making them successful.
Excellent.
All the others light those up. Is that enough for now, Tina?
That is enough, and your 2 minutes is up anyway, so perfectly well timed. Thank you, Chris, so much. So Dawood, you're next. Dawood? Are you there, Dawood? Excellent.
So we looked at both the index and also business coalition, and we looked at it through the three lenses of need, purpose, and scope. We jumped around a little bit, but essentially some of the points that were made were the following. We really liked this idea that health and health equals wealth and wealth equals health, and you can't have one without the other. But there's no one size that fits all. It's really important to listen to the individual, because if it's a group of corporations that come up with an index, then guess what? They're going to design it in a way that suits them. It's very important that there's collaboration within corporations. This needs to be embedded within HR practices, and the point was made that we need to get away from exam technique type indices where you kind of game the system. Actually, these need to be really well thought out, and these need to incorporate such areas as nutrition, exercise,
what a corporation, really coming down to these fine points around how do corporations treat their employees. And we had a lot of suggestions about the sorts of things that are good for employees that we could start to measure. Someone made the point that you work for on average something like 90,000 hours of your life, and so work is a fabulous place to embed good habits and policies, and it's a great access to younger people to educate them on how to prevent ill health later on. We talked a lot about COVID-19 and whether or not it's actually going to change anything in reality, and the point was made that, well, just look at this, just the fact that we're having this conversation shows that the world is changing, and that's then going to roll through into the way we work. However, the point was also made that that is true for us because we're white-collar workers, but of course there's a whole demographic out there who don't work like this, and they're in the services, and they've actually been hit pretty badly by COVID-19, and will be hit by COVID-20, COVID-21 if that comes down the track.
So one more point. Your 2 minutes is up. Are you
The point was made that Athena Swan are very good at helping to measure the way businesses do things in general HR space. It would be a good thing if we could embed a health index into what they measure as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dawud. Wonderful. So Julia Randall-Kahn, you're next.
Yeah, so thank you. We had a very wide-ranging discussion in our group covering all sorts of topics from HR issues to mobility to well-being, etc. And I think our points sort of bubble up into three core areas when thinking about the need, purpose and scope of the coalition and the index. One is around the range of participants that we need to involve in this discussion. So the unions, occupational health professionals, charities, and looking in a very collaborative way, as we've all been agreed, I think, in terms of collaboration in relation to this discussion. Looking not just within the UK as to what's already here, but also around the world. And something I would offer is, for example, Columbia University having their Wellbeing and Aging Index, which is an international index which looks at well-being from different like a barometer. So opportunity to look at carefully at the range of participants that are involved in this. Accreditation, many of our discussions came into accreditation and the incentives that we need to give businesses for focusing on this area. And then we had lots of practical suggestions in the third area. So, for example, looking at the ways employers can use their health and safety, the technology, making much more easy access to blood pressure monitors, for example, and raising the standard of education on health devices that can be available easily in the workplace, thinking about the travel metrics, how people travel to their places of work, and the extension of policies, so that you have a sort of a lifelong policy bucket, as it were, a lifelong policy ticket, whether you're coming back from caring, in and out of work through maternity or maternity leaves, that kind of thing. So being very flexible in terms of the way those sort of policies run. Classes, activity being promoted through the working environment. So lots of different practical ways to nudge along this conversation of raising the awareness around the education that needs to be monitored and tracked through the type of index that we're talking about. I think that was the main points, but a great discussion, so thank you to everybody.
Perfectly timed. Thank you so much, Julia. Perfectly presented back. Thank you. So next we've got Tim Pike. Tim, would you like to go? Hello, Tim.
Good afternoon. That was a wide-ranging discussion covering a lot of details, so I'm not going to be able to do it justice in this minute. Some of the themes I pulled out from it covered features such as who else needs to be engaged and be involved, particularly academics when it comes to using the index and its use. So how they will interact, how they will be able to use it, because there's already a lot of good data around and they would much like to keep using even more. Particularly on the back of that becomes don't reinvent the wheel to them. So there's a number of indexes already in play, and particularly please base off the strength of those. In the case of enacting what comes out of here, there's a particular strength to say look to the charities and use them as partners, because they're quite often specialists in areas of health and implementation. And when trying to make the sort of business case to groups, it was actually look therefore to try and get the sales of the businesses. How does this present something positive? So look to the value of the experience, the productivity gains, that this can offer through a stronger workforce, less turnover of staff, and features such as that. Couple of other general features, because you're going to cut me off very soon, I suspect.
You've got a minute.
Make sure it's framed in a positive manner. So it is not about looking at an index of poor health, but to actually look at it as an index of good outcomes. So make it positive, make it about being of health. And then just trying to balance the short-term actions against what will be a very long-term to measure some of the outcomes, and how to try and get people on board when you're looking so far into the future. Finish up with the particularly repeated point of attention really actually has to be about who is measured. It would be very easy to pick up and measure and monitor all those least.
Yeah.
It's very important to count everything from ethnic groups and socioeconomic groups who are hard to measure.
Absolutely.
Have the greatest impact.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim. That was wonderful. So Cynthia, you're next up and the last group.
Yes. So again, I think others have said it. I'm unlikely to do this justice in 2 minutes, but I will attempt to do so. So in terms of the business coalition, we talked a lot about the need to be sure that it's a clear proposition to businesses in order to encourage them and incentivize them to be part of that coalition. So something about the benefits to their employees, perhaps reducing absenteeism. There was also mention of the fact that there needed to be a good cross-section of business from different socio-economic regions that would be part of that, and academia definitely needed to be part of that group. Someone mentioned that in the past the relationship with academia has been quite transactional in terms of how much funding the academic partner got. But there was much more that was valuable, and indeed best partnerships tried to pull through the time and the knowledge transfer contributions of both partners, and this potentially could be part of any accreditation. In terms of business index, we talked about the fact that we needed to incentivize the businesses to be part of that index. There needed to be a carrot and a stick. In fact, that was mentioned twice. So the carrot is about getting business to wake up to the opportunity that this presents, and the fact that the workforce cliff is still looming in terms of the sort of age group and the birth rate and such. The stick was around encouraging reporting potentially across age bands to similar to what's done with the gender pay gap. There was something about financial rewards and perhaps penalties, but transparent benchmarking is required to drive quality.
Yes.
And one size, I'll just finish by saying one size doesn't fit all. And actually, if consumers can see that businesses are treating their employees very well, that should help engender credibility in any accreditation.
Fantastic, Cynthia. Excellent. So we've got 8 minutes left till the official close of the meeting. We will keep the lines open so we can have an informal chat with people who'd like to stay on. But I've got a million questions and I've been monitoring the chat. But before I step in, I'm just going to ask Professor Lynn Corner. Are you there, Lynn? Would you like to ask any questions? Hi, Lynn. Lynn's been very involved in the nationalist and the Health of the Nation strategy, and very involved all throughout last year. So, Lynn, over to you.
Okay, so I've been monitoring the chat, and there's a really kind of rich chat which has really captured the points about how this is actually about inequalities and exclusion as much as anything else. And actually, I think grounding anything that comes out in something that's very real. I think through the chat there was lots and lots of comments about how people welcome the talk of kindness and resilience and a new social contract, but kind of almost saying, well, what's the carrot and what's the stick, that business needs to see the benefits. So what is the reality going to actually be? I think has come through. So that's one of the questions. And then a really powerful kind of narrative in the chat about not reinventing the wheel, but actually using what's there much more smartly, using charities as a source of expertise, and then linking to data. I think a lot of chat around Ian's excellent points about exploiting healthcare data and not just, using healthcare consumption. So I think they were kind of some of the big issues that came through. So I think, general kind of real enthusiasm, but wanting to ground it in saying, we have an awful lot of information already. How do we act with the reality and not just the concepts?
Fantastic, Lynn. Thank you so much. And because we've got 6 minutes left, I might just ask a question. I think what seems to be emerging is that we need this business coalition first to create the momentum, and the business index, whatever it becomes, needs to follow at the second stage. So preventative health, is obviously a theme that we're looking at very, very closely, in this issue of addressing this is obviously very strongly made in our Health of the Nation strategy. Just a question, and maybe I can ask Ian, or who's been so involved in local resilience building at a community level, harnessing data. Who are the voices that we need to have around the table? We talk a lot about collaboration and getting the right voices and perspectives. Who would we get around the table, whether it's an index, an accreditation scheme, whatever it emerges to be? What are the sort of the voices that we must make sure we listen to that perhaps haven't been heard before? Would anyone like to answer that question? Maybe Ian first. I don't know. Anyone from the lead discussants before we close?
Where localities are self-organising in recovery plans from COVID-19 at the moment, there's a really healthy business conversation, particularly on inclusive growth in the reboot from the current crisis. So I see local government convening at a sensible size, so combined authority type size of around 3 million population coverage. Starts to get enough of the voices from constituent local authorities, the NHS alongside social care in parity, enough business partners, not just the usual suspects in LEPs, but people with something valuable to bring to the table, especially when businesses are representing a chain. So if the output of one business is the input of another, is the input of the public sector, and we create that cycle, then the sustainability question starts to be answered. As soon as you go to national level, snap of focus and critical mass and the system is lost. And the other critical bit is the community voice. So the public representatives and the narrative with the community and uses of the data and priorities for investment, in particular deprived neighbourhoods, the need to concentrate, maybe a new type of innovation campus for the whole population, with a gritty conversation that why is that on this patch and not on that patch. You can only have, I think, that effective focus at a certain diameter, and that was also a diameter of trust for the use of data and resources.
So it sounds like to me that whatever we come up with has to work and has to be tested to be able to work really at a local community level, whatever we come up with.
Decentralised resilience.
Yes, exactly. So decentralised model. So any comments on that before we close? And I'll say a few words at the end, just in terms of next steps. Would anyone like to comment on that from the group? Les or John? Les?
Yeah, could I make a comment? I think if you look at the big statistical picture and how we get our information, we know a lot about areas where people live. We know about their health. We know about their deprivation. We almost have chapter and verse about it. But when you come to look at the business sector, it's really hard to find very specific information about businesses in an area, a number of employees, all the basic questions that you want to know. So I don't see a lot of merit in reinventing the wheel and recycling information, repackaging information that we already have. We can show very, very clearly that deprivation has a negative impact on employment, on health, and it's a poor, and it has very low attraction for investment. And it seems to me that you need to reverse that and rebalance the areas. And by the way, I don't think it's just a north-south issue. You find deprivation pockmarked all over the country. It clusters in some areas, others. So it needs to be nationwide, and I think it was be UK-wide as well.
And just a question while I have you, Les.
Yeah.
Is the data available? Can we get it, this sort of data?
Well, the business level data, I think we have to do some mining within the government's administrative systems, particularly VAT. We need to see how things like the labour market survey can be repurposed and readapted. We need to do a lot of preliminary work searching the databases. The other point I would make is that if you do want data on individual industries and so on, you often have to pay for it and pay lots of money, whereas the statistical system that the ONS supports and the government statistical system is all absolutely free.
Yeah.
So we just need to look at that whole access issue and what's out there and how it can be brought to bear. And I think the big information gap in this area is lack of information about business. It's not about communities, it's about areas, it's about plugging that gap.
And I can see Pamela Gallatley's head nodding, so I think there's more to be done in terms of accessing data from business. So I think that's very clear. So I'm just going to spend 30 seconds just the sort of the what next, and then we'll the official meeting will close in 30 seconds. So because I know our time is running out. Sorry, Lynn, did you want to say something? Okay, sorry, I just thought. So the what next, I hope all of you are aware that we have a final wrap-up presentation on the 22nd, this coming Friday, at 3 till 4 o'clock, where we're going to assemble, so Damien Green, Ben Page, John Godfrey, Jeff Filkin will be co-moderating with myself, and a few others. Will be essentially taking some of the nuggets that we've got and talking about what next. So Andy Briggs will be there from the Longevity Council. So essentially, we'll essentially be convening with some of the nuggets and the ideas that have come through this process to kind of look at, well, what next can we do and what do we want to take forward? So please do come to that because that will be sort of, I guess, the next stage and how we approach the business coalition and all the other ideas and how it actually knits together with the other elements of the health of the nation strategy and in particular on the data side. So there's a lot of discussion around technology and data at today's discussion, and of course links into some of these other ideas that are in the health of the nation strategy. So I hope very much that as many of you as possible can attend that meeting. If you haven't already been invited, just drop me a line. And of course that will be a live session at the Longevity Leaders Conference. So thank you so much for everyone who has participated today. I think we're definitely getting some clarity and some specific ideas that we can take forward, in this next stage. This was always meant to be a sort of a sounding out process. So we don't have all the answers yet, but I think we do have some real clarity, and we've got a community that is obviously very keen to kind of, get engaged, and that's obviously the most important thing. So thank you so much. We're going to close, it's officially closed, but we'll keep the lines open for everyone who'd like to stay on to chat. And thanks to everyone who's been actively involved. Well, that goes for everyone. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Tina.
Would you like to say something? You kick off.
The point you made about, you can see me now, I had my camera midway around with apologies. The data point is so interesting in that what has become clear to me over the last 10 weeks is that the data that exists in the ONS, by the government, held in different repositories in different silos, is just not being used intelligently. Because when we talk, for example, if we talk about spending taxpayers' money on PPE website and a PPE telephone line, for goodness sake, right? This is all data driven. We know how many care homes there are, where the care homes are, and therefore what the requirements are. It's all very predictable data. Therefore, the analytics and the insight function, the ability to get hold of intelligently of the data warehouse and pulling that data together, asking the real questions rather than kind of reinventing the wheel, to unlock the value of that data is so important. Because that will tell us about prevention, tell us what needs to be prevention. But also, what's also been clear to me over the last weeks, and Tina and I, we had this discussion some time ago before this series of roundtables, is businesses really felt shut out. Entrepreneurs who believe they've had skills, contributions and value, in support of COVID have seen themselves shut out and have seen money effectively wasted to driving up the cost of PPE and innovation, if you like, being completely shut out of the market. So we do need to think of a way that the public sector and the government can engage collegially and collaboratively, and for that to be encouraged. And I think that there's lots to be said about the new machinery that needs to be built to enable that to happen. Ideas are there. To avoid reinventing a wheel, we do need to kind of incentivise machinery and to make sure before we invent something or launch something, we do the scouring as to understanding what actually is out there in the market, so we don't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. Pamela, you'd like to say something? You're on mute. Yeah.
Hi.
Pamela.
Hi, Adam. Just in response to that point as well, I think totally agree that we need to mine what we've already got. But at the same time, having looked at the ONS data, lots of other data, reliant on very subjective analysis, opposed to objective data, and I think there's an awful lot of missing factors in the data. So I think the other thing we need to look at is what are the gaps in our data, what we have, and yes, use it, but also are the missing gaps, and there is quite a lot of it if we're trying to achieve what we're setting out to be. We really don't understand the personal risks of a lot of our population in the workplace, and I think that's what we need to try and achieve if we're supposed to prevent ill health and manage it better as and when it occurs.
Yeah. Anyone want to step in and comment? Ian.
I've been in discussions with ONS, who requested data we have on national monitoring of patients. We have very detailed information we have now nationally on everyone admitted to hospital COVID-19, and those data are being flowed into ONS. But ONS didn't have a legal instrument to flow the data back into the NHS England or to Public Health England. So we're not able to get the enhanced neighbourhood characteristics, occupational classifications, things we'd quite like to use locally, including recovery plans, because there are these silos Adam was talking about between big agencies, and there is some degree of competition between those agencies for who lead the conversation, and quite frankly, the national interest should be first among equals at the moment and not agencies. And I hear that unified voice in localities, but I'm not hearing it nationally.
So, just back on Ian's point, we had a real problem where we were trying to get a drug trial sorted for COVID, and it went through Public Health England that didn't communicate with the MRC that they need to be running it. So there's some...
Someone's got...
organisations just don't communicate.
Sorry, we had another line ringing, which is a bit distracting. So yes, the data silos and people not communicating. Les, you've got a point on that, and you've been living and breathing it for years.
Yeah, this data silo point, I think access to data that we need has actually gotten worse over the last 10 years, particularly health data. So many roadblocks have been put in the way. I get the very strong impression that, sorry Ian, I think universities are cornering some of the market. I've had a consultancy business for 20 years where we used to be able to get data that enabled us to estimate populations at a very, very local level. It was hugely valued. We were able to turn the data around quickly and give it to local authorities who would then use it for local planning or even challenging the ONS. All that sort of thing has gone by the board, and I suspect there are huge vested interests that are blocking this, but I also think there's a titanic struggle going on between the privacy lobby and the data analyst lobby. And really, this is a silly argument. It's perfectly possible to take data, link it, anonymise it, and use it for good purposes. But I sense that in some ways we're actually going backwards.
I mean, just an observation from me in this, obviously what we've seen, and this is where COVID have really, really highlighted this, it's those nations where data sharing is easier, which have been able to mobilise much more quickly. And I think there's this and a question, you know, that it keeps on coming up. But there's this balance between, obviously, you know, civic empowerment, state surveillance. That's sort of, you know, that's often in the press about, you know, what has emerged, you know, from the whole kind of data aspects of the COVID crisis. But what do you think? I mean, because we, you know, and this is with respect to this open life data framework that we're looking at in the Health of the Nation strategy. What does good look like if we were to, and what will force, you know, this data sharing, you know, for the wider public good? What do we need to because we need to because this is something that we're actually going to be looking at very soon, and it's just a bit of brainstorming around that. What is needed to actually force this data sharing that we know will deliver, you know, results for the health of the nation? You know, what do we have to do?
Well, shall I start?
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to be able to link data across domains. By domains, I mean health, benefits, housing, employment, if necessary. And we need to do that in a way which is guards people's privacy. It's like a production process. Coming out at the other end, you get quite aggregate data on things like the relationship between comorbidity, benefit status, income, employment, and so on. And this can be extremely powerful. I've got examples of where, unfortunately, we were able to do this in a big study in East London, where we linked benefits data, housing data, and others to GP medical records. I won't go into all the details about all the permissions we needed to do that. And we were able to show that, for example, somebody who was, let's say, obese, had diabetes, heart problems, was a smoker, their annual healthcare costs were 3 or 4 times higher than a person that didn't have those conditions. So already you get a link between the cost of the impact of bad health on one sector of the healthcare system.
Which will really focus minds. The cost.
It focuses mind. You say, goodness me, if we eliminated diabetes through this program or that program, we'd save ourselves, you know, X million a year or even billion a year if you scaled it up to the whole country. But we're just not doing that. We're just not doing it because there are too many roadblocks, if you like, in the way to prevent us achieving that sort of goal. So
how to remove the roadblocks? So Ian, what do you think we need to do?
I think we need to give permission to natural size populations that have a critical mass. So the integrated care system size of around 2.5, 3 million people. Regions to get on with it. The biggest impediments are across England, not the devolved nations, because this is just too big to organise itself. But I've seen in the last few weeks, after frustration of the public health and community organisations being able to get the data they need to take control measures, is to stand up integrated care records within weeks, and they planned this would take years. So in 2 regions, one of 2.8 million and the other of 2.6 million, over 4 weeks they've put a single cloud instance of all the hospital and social care records and local situation report data feeds. This is possible. Where the wheel clamps are taken off, those regions have actually begged forgiveness rather than permission. Incentivizing self-organisation and innovation, entrepreneurial thinking about how they use that for recovery. I think we'll create a grid of agile solutions that we could never achieve. That's what we're doing.
Fantastic. Any comments on that? Really interesting.
Yeah, sorry, Tina.
Yes, Adam.
Hi, Adam. Yeah, just reinforcing what Ian. And you know, it's really interesting. Ian's from Liverpool. If you look at teenage obesity, for example, and look at the cost, and look at the innovation required in preventing teenage obesity and the impact in terms of prevention of diabetes and the cost of the health economy, etc. If you look at North Liverpool, well, you're going to need innovative types of solutions as opposed to a traditional public health solution of telling kids in North Liverpool to go to a GP who's going to prescribe you with a diet plan. But you can go to Ginsters and get 5 pasties for £1. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So, but equally, solutions required in North Liverpool may well be different from solutions required in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
So the data in terms of clustering and segmentation and building different kind of cluster groups, if you like, and testing and not being afraid to test different types of solutions. But we need the standard machinery to test, so we've got empirical evidence that we can then move forwards with. Well, we should be afraid to fail. It strikes me that if we can create some kind of innovation engine, that we can quickly kind of pilot by theme and come up with cluster-based solutions, but also taking best practices from the world. That's got to be part of the requirement here.
Yes.
Can I just say that they're linked innovation problems, Tina.
Yeah.
A third of the community, a third of the children born in Liverpool are born in poverty.
Yes.
And there's a use of the integrated data system for dealing with complex lives, so troubled families, to then track into the school monitoring of heights and weights, because those children experiencing toxic stress are then more likely to develop obesity.
Yes, and that's been...
Kind of local entrepreneurial thinking, the health entrepreneurship that is happening under the surface in extremely pressured areas.
Yes.
Don't incentivize that. These areas do this despite
it.
national directives.
Which, absolutely.
That's being used.
Absolutely. Now, I know I've got someone, Alice, you've had your hand up for quite a while, and there's a couple other people with their hand up. Alice, did you want to comment on something?
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks, Tina. I just wanted to just build on what Ian was saying as well. We have, not meaning to sing Ian's praises particularly, but there's very few doctors who understand doctor medicine-ness and understand public health and also understand analytics. Because traditionally public health is taught from a very older-fashioned, statistics point of view rather than the more modern analytics tools we have. And I think it's, as doctors, we should be engaging in analytics and understanding it more, and then I think it can help advancing the conversation. And in addition to that, we need to advance the national conversation around data generally, because people get very confused with how their blood results fit in with their 10,000 steps a day versus with, and there's a perception, because of largely American insurance companies, there's a perception that your data is so hugely valuable, when in fact the reality that you went to the GP 3 times last year and you got 1 antibiotic isn't actually so hugely valuable. So I think Natalie Banner's work around understanding patient data, I think that needs a push, because then we need the society behind us to say it's a good idea to have your information integrated, and like Adam was saying, it helps with a coordinated response as well.
So Al, I mean, I think you raise a really good point. I think most people, when you ask them, well, are you happy to share your data if you get a benefit? And most people, of course, will say yes. And of course, people share their data all the time, day to day as they go about their lives. And then, of course, most people will say, would you like to share your data for wider societal good? And most people will say yes. But there's still a massive educational mission around the value of data sharing that still needs to be had. And Sid, you wanted to say something about that. I know you're passionate about this. Obviously wearing the responsible AI hat at Microsoft, of course. We can't hear you very well, Sid. Can you speak a bit closer into the microphone? You're on mute. Hold on. Unmute. There we go.
Hello, can you hear me now?
That's much better. Yeah. Thanks, Sid.
Sorry. A couple of microphones here, didn't know which one. I completely agree on the point of sort of Ian brought up civic data cooperators. I think that is imperative that we start with the local community and sort of expand outwards. And the reason for that is the pervasiveness of trust that sort of moves through society. I think is kind of reassessing the tools. So where we pointed out that the tools have been changed. Just today that Microsoft's releasing explainable AI models and data models, and things like homomorphic encryption and looking for privacy, which enable you to run machine learning models on top of encrypted and anonymized data. Immediately, the regulatory bodies in this you form of GDPR or any kind of regulation is important. You serve the president of the area that you're working in, and for that the importance is to know intent. The whole privacy debate started from people monetizing data for things with not getting anything in return.
Yeah.
Or there was a value disparity that was looking. So we need to be able to fix or put some checks and balances in terms of data audit, in terms of data governance, and in terms of data oversight that can help us navigate some of these regulatory.
Yes, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think there's a massive educational need to educate the public about where things have moved, data privacy, privacy preserving software, decentralization, all these ways in which we can protect privacy. I think the media haven't helped, sort of the hysteria around obviously some of the scare, the Cambridge Analytica and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, as you're saying, this debate between, the big tech sort of monetizing all the data, etc. And all these sorts of things are obviously what's confusing, I think, a lot of people. Now, I'm going to go to Richard Swift, who wanted to say something. Richard, what would you like to say?
Thank you. Yes. As we've been looking at a business coalition, this is in the title of the thing, I thought it might be useful to look at how business can benefit in not quite so obvious ways from the health of its employees. And one of those is, it really starts with Henry Ford's statement that business success is about management and management success is about attitude. This links back into corporate culture, which is a major determinant of whether businesses succeed or not, and probably over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, whether they survive or not. Corporate culture, which I used to deal with extensively in corporate turnarounds, is really about people feeling part of something worthwhile, and feeling they have a mission, and feeling cared for. So they can then want to bring all of themselves to work. And being healthy, I used to work with the health insurance industry. And what I was banging on about there was, rather than just quoting the lowest rate to large companies, let's talk about helping those companies, this is 15 years ago, have less sickness. Because that's where the interests of the health insurer and the company and the employee all are completely coincident. And then Discovery Insurance came along and all the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
This is one really thing where it is the selfish self-interest of the company. And they will recognise that because there's books and books being written on corporate culture and helping people to stay healthy, not so they can be driven into the ground, but so that they can have the life they wanted. And by the way, also bring all themselves to work, is a huge one. And what we're looking at here really is it's chronic degenerative conditions. These are the ones that are essentially the decider of one's fate, whether you brush off COVID-19 and COVID-20, 21 or not, or not. So there's all that coming together there for companies to say, for every good possible reason, let's get together and be as healthy and as good as we can, and to drive that from the top as well.
I think you've made a really good point, Richard, and I don't know if Pamela's still here, but of course Pamela Gallatley, who runs Healthcare RM, that advises big companies on corporate health and well-being. I mean, she will say that actually there's, from her perspective, there's actually quite a lot of interest for business to come together around this point. And I think the other point, just to mention, I keep on, and I've made reference to this a few times, is the Stevenson Pharma report that put a cost to mental health and the cost to employers of having people who are mentally sort of unwell in their businesses. So once you put a price on it, then of course it does create a tension. And one of the comments I know, I think it was. Can't remember who made it, but you need the finance director to kind of look at the numbers to really get the business to do something in that particular instance. But I think I hear you, and I think the corporate culture, and I think corporate culture. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that. I think we're going through this change of what businesses will survive, and if you go back to the points that Richard Boland made in the first roundtable. Of course, he's wearing the retail industry hat, which of course has gone through a huge amount of change. He said that the kind of things that they're talking about in terms of sustainable business is social impact, it's values like kindness, bravery, doing the right thing. These are all the sorts of things, and actually putting your employees first rather than shareholders first, which again was a point that interestingly Alistair McQueen made, and he wears the big hat at Aviva, saying, through this crisis, that's what they did. They will eventually have to focus obviously on the bottom line, but I think businesses are realizing how important really, really looking after their employees is. So that's something that obviously is what this is all about as well. There's that, that responsibility of business, and in the end will add to the bottom line. But how best to convince them is I guess what we're really looking at here. Any observations or comments? Terry, you wanted to say something.
Sorry, it's just a quick one. Unfortunately, I have to close the meeting in a few minutes.
Okay. I know you're very busy with your conference.
Yeah, we've got a conference session using this channel in 3 or 4 minutes, but I just wanted to say thank you for everything that you've done. If you wanted to have some closing remarks or an opportunity to wrap up things in the next couple of minutes, would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine, but you can't just pass it over to me, can you? The host?
Yeah, but the issue is I need this.
Oh, okay. Don't worry. That's fine. We understand. I think we've had a good natter. So I think we'll have to say goodbye because Terry needs the line. Any final comment that one urgently wants to make, Susan?
Well, I don't know if it's urgent, but I guess I've just been listening, and I just get back to my core beliefs that we end up getting lost trying to boil that ocean again.
Yeah.
We need 3 fundamental goals and to go for them.
Yeah.
And I like what Kathleen Cox said, and also Jerome Byrne was making the point. We've got muddled messaging, we've got structural faults that are built into our systems, and I know that everyone knows this, but rather than amass more data, I don't see the data gaps. I see the entire ocean flooded with numbers and statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we practically do with all that?
Mm-hmm.
0-hour contracts. People are feeling disconnected with their work. They're not feeling valued. There's huge life expectancy gap, of course, we know, from one street to the next, but also from one desk to the upper floors. There's no sense of investment with employment anymore. And post-COVID, the whole workforce is on a cliff.
Yeah.
The business is going to be scrabbling to try to keep making money,
to
keep the boat afloat. So I just find, in the muddled messaging about stress and obesity, I'm someone that looks at lettuce and gains 100 pounds. And, we need to draw the connections between the new science about low carb and diabetes and 10% of our budget going to that. I mean, I've done keto for 3 years and I'm not any thinner, but all of this needs to be
So Susan, I
dug into
absolutely
in a more focused way.
Absolutely. So Susan, I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to close because I know Terry needs a line, but I'm going to close. You're absolutely right. We need to bring together all the new stuff. The science, the data, all the things that are happening at the cutting edge, bringing it together and really address the fundamental points that will really deliver what we're all trying to do, which is to deliver better health and wealth for the nation. So that will come at the next stage, and this is very, very top of mind. The 90-word sort of call to action, really focused on how we're going to do this. So I'm going to leave that with you, and this is what we're going to be really focusing on the final session on Friday, how we can really take this to the next stage. So Susan, points well made, and I think we're going to have to go because Terry needs the line, but really appreciate, I'm going to send another feedback form, following this with all the recording and all the rest of it. Do fill in some feedback on the form if you have some other points to make. And we'll definitely look at it. So thank you so much to all of you, and hopefully see you on Friday. And thanks, Les, and everyone who's been massive contributors to today's discussion. All right, cheerio. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.